Okay. Okay, thank you, Mary. All right. We'll go there. Sorry.
That's good.
I told you there would be a lot of snafu.
Well, I'm not starting over. But I was so grateful to realize that that's not what happened at all. I think people took it in the spirit as it was intended, which is that what we're speaking of with that are things that are not quantifiable by scientific measure, but that fill out the depths of our human intelligence, our imagination, our creativity, our response to beauty, our sense of personal purpose in the world, right? Things that really do bring us to fullness and authenticity, but that are not statistically quantifiable, right? So I was really happy to see that there really wasn't any of that happening at all. So I'm very delighted with the cover and the title integrating. Okay, upside down.
Well, it worked a while ago.
Okay. Do I need to?
Is there an on switch on it?
No, it did just work. It worked in rehearsal.
Oh, is it amazing?
I wonder if it just.
Is there a button?
What I've been, yeah, you could probably do.
There we go.
There we go.
I know. So well done. I know. Who cares about the new book? We all just want to talk about Carmen, right? The reason I put this up here, as some people have in the last, last time I was speaking about this book, I put this up here because Carmen has passed away. And people have been asking, so I wanted to share this with you. She died last May and around her birthday time. And after she died, it felt odd because she had a very public life. But her passing, after all we've been through and with all of that book, taking it around the globe, her passing felt very private. And it took me a while to figure out how to announce it. And I would like, if you'll be patient, I'd like to read to you what I wrote on my newsletter. And a few of you have my newsletter, but it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to say. And so I just want to read it how I said it because, and I also apologize, I don't like to read off of technology, but my toner ran out right when I went to print this one little page. So for Carmen, now let's check. And, I read through this today and I realized the words that I put together for Carmen are more relevant now than I think they were even when I wrote them. So dear friends, with sadness, I share the news that Carmen, the starling who was at the heart of my book, Mozart's Starling, died a couple of weeks ago. She was 7 years old. The silence in our home feels immense. Carmen was playful, intelligent, and full of song. She was friendly and shimmering, as you see. She wove her life into ours ever since joining our household when she was just 5 days old, rescued from a nest that was about to be destroyed. With so many crises facing people and the planet, it may seem indulgent to mourn the loss of a single bird. But one of our most beautiful qualities as humans is complexity of mind and heart. We are able to feel love and care across dimensions of life, from one individual creature to all beings on Earth. Some friends have asked whether I created a funeral ceremony for Carmen as Mozart did for the starling who lived with him. I didn't. The moment of Carmen's passing felt very private. With my husband, Tom, I simply carried her still shining little form to the garden and laid her in an earthen grave lined with fern fronds. Tom found a pretty stone to mark the place, and I sprinkled marigold petals over her, weeping the whole time, of course, and whispering prayers for her peaceful passage into the next adventure. Later, to complete a great circle, I placed on the stone one of the chestnuts I gathered from Mozart's grave in Vienna. And you know how long that lasted? About 20 minutes before a squirrel came and took it. That is the thought that counts. Carmen's life touched so many. Through her, thousands of people around the world who read Mozart's Starling came to a deepened awareness of animal consciousness, avian intelligence, and the kinship between humans and all of life. Her lessons are a counterpoint to the despair of isolation. She taught me humility and awe and friendship across borders. I will be grateful to her always. In the coda to her book, I wrote, Carmen brings joy and depth and insight to our family. I believe she has a good life, and I'm glad she didn't die with her nestmates. But not one single day passes that I do not wish I could see her fly free. Fly free now, dear Carmen. Thank you for allowing me to share that. So Carmen will reappear later in our program. So Helen's interior illustrations are so wonderful too. Every time I open my book, I honestly feel as if there are feathers and leaves falling out of the pages. And I, just the ephemera that we gather in our favorite volumes of poetry, love letters, and it's just her beautiful artwork she lets wander from side to side. So I don't know how good everyone's vision is here and at home, so I'll read on screen. This is a quote from Yoshifumi Miyazaki of Chiba University in Japan in the 80s. He wrote, less than 0.01% of our species' history has been spent in modern surroundings. Humans have spent over 99.99% of their time living in the natural environment. Hence, we function in a constant stress state. And then I said, no wonder we are such a mess. So Miyazaki was one of the researchers who in the 80s started doing the research that grounds what we now call forest bathing. And that grew up in response to, during that time frame in the 80s and prior, therapists and physicians in Japan had begun just intuitively prescribing time in nature to their patients who had poor health or had anxiety or depression, so physical or mental health. And finally, people that were interested in statistical, research-based medicine said, we can't be prescribing things that we don't know work. And so that spurred Miyazaki and others to begin creating this really whole raft now of research that supports the ways in which time in the natural world does support our health. So it balances our parasympathetic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that makes us feel calm. It balances the hemoglobin in our brain, our heart rate, our blood pressure. It activates areas in the prefrontal cortex that have to do with our imagination and our creativity, and even our ability to know and navigate our place in space. So all of these beautiful benefits. And what we've heard in the last 40 years is that science has discovered our connection to nature. And I think I have a couple of thoughts about that. And one of them I'm going to spiral back to at the end. But then what I want to offer here at the beginning is, what the science is beautiful. It's showing us details about the ways in which we are physiologically connected to the natural world that we could never know ourselves, the exact way that our brains are activated, the exact parts of our nervous system and how they react, and the counts of our blood pressure. But this idea of finding our authenticity and the wholeness of our health in nature is not new. It's very, very ancient, right? So poets, musicians, artists, earth-based indigenous cultures across time and space have proclaimed this truth. That our bodies, our thoughts, our minds, and our spirits are affected by the whole of the urban community and affect the whole in return. And that is sort of the basis of this book is finding our way through the questions that this connection invites us into in this particular urban moment. So Kathy was talking about how we both had streams in our backyards when we were young, and the title of this book until the very last minute was Frog Church. And so I left it as an homage. So I called the invocation, instead of calling it an introduction, I call it Frog Church. So I got it in there because when I was really young, I was raised Catholic, but my true sanctuary was down at the bottom of this canyon behind my house in a suburb of Seattle, Kent. And I go down to the creek and lie on my back and sort of I was an introverted kid with a notebook and an apple and these frogs. So I would lie on my back, and I learned that if you didn't, jump at the frogs, but if you just slipped your hand under them gently, you could hold them and feel their soft, round bellies on your hand. And I would sit them on my belly and have this little congregation down there in the canyon. So I thought Frog Church was a great title for the book, and my publisher, my editor thought, well, maybe, but there was another editor high up at Little Brown who said, no, it turns out doesn't like frogs. And he said that, no, lots of people don't like frogs. And you know what? It's true. Lots, I know, not us, but some people. And the other thing, they said that it was obscure and like a boutique book. And I thought, you know what? Okay. But I didn't know what to do. And when I just started, I did whatever I do when I don't know what to do creatively. I got, other than going out and sitting at the base of a tree and putting my ear next to it and saying, what should I write? I get a big piece of paper and my big box of crayons, and I just start writing words and associations down. And oddly, this word rooted came up over and over. And when I did a search for it in my book, it was already in the book all over the place. And it felt so right that I was afraid to look it up. And I was sure that there were already 10 major books named Rooted, but there are none. So I'm delighted with how it came out. So one of the things that I started this book before I knew there was going to be a pandemic. And at that time, there was a different president. And it was a very, very difficult time. Climate crisis was proceeding apace as it is now. There were so many things happening that we all, if you can believe it, then felt really overwhelmed. And the question that I heard over and over again asked when I was doing readings from my previous books or speaking at conferences was, what do we do? What do we do? And of course, that's a question, it is the question, but it's a question for which there is no one answer. There's no one single answer, no one right answer. It's a very individual, it's a universal question with an individual answer, right? So what I wanted to do was to somehow speak to that question while carrying that duality. And so in Rooted, I offer a series of practices, of way markers, of invitations into certain ways of being and conversations that can help us feel rooted, deepen our connection, individual and collective connection to the natural wild earth, and through that, to come to the most authentic answer to that question for ourselves. So I'm just going to offer a couple of those way markers that make their way into the book tonight. Who's heard of earthing? Earthing? So I was walking in my local park. I live in West Seattle. I live in the south end of West Seattle, and down the street from my park, or from my house, is this up over the hill and down is a beautiful, about 250 wooded acres, nothing like you have here in Whidbey, of forest that leads down to a trail along the beach. And up above, I like to stay up above where the trail on the beach is accessible to everyone, which is wonderful. But I also like to walk in the bluff over the top where the trails are natural. And the Park Service likes to put that, you know, that sharp, prickly gravel on the main paths. I think it helps them drain somehow. But I found this whole kind of series of smaller paths beyond the main paths that are really soft. And because we live in such a temperate environment, I found a trail where I can walk for about a half an hour without shoes on and have it be safe for my feet. So one day I was walking barefoot and I was holding my runner shoes in my hand, and I saw this woman who was a little older than me, and she was so serene, and she was sort of floating through the woods, and she had her shoes in her hands too. And I thought, you know, in retrospect, I thought I shouldn't have said anything because she was this ethereal forest fairy walking past. But instead I said, happy barefoot walking. And she said, kind of ethereally, she said, I'm earthing. Hey, off she floated, and I thought, well, then I'm earthing too. And I thought, earthing, you know, I know I've heard that somewhere. So I got home, I Googled it. And in fact, it was a trend in the 80s. I mean, it's still got a very active following now. And the idea, there was this trio of, there was an electrician, a psychotherapist, and maybe a biochemist, anyway, a motley crew of some sciencey electrical people who came up with the theory that the earth has a negative ionic charge and our human bodies have a positive ionic charge. And so when we wear shoes that don't allow conduction, so like our rubber soles, we separate ourselves from the exchange of ions that would normally balance our charge. So we're over positive. And this causes all kinds of problems. So it causes anxiety, it causes inflammation, and all of its attendant worries. So I thought, okay, that is super cool. I really, really want this to be true, that we need to put our feet on the earth to experience the fullness of our health. And so I read their book, which is a lot of fun. And I talked to physics people, and I just couldn't find the science to support it. Every time they footnoted in an article, a paper, it was written by them. So I'm not going to call this pseudoscience, and it's possible the physics professors that I spoke to told me that it doesn't hold up, it doesn't make sense to them, and they told me why in complicated terms. But maybe, who knows? Who knows how the science will unfold? So I just will leave that open-ended. But what I will say is that when I talk to people who are biomechanists, people who study the way that we move in our bodies, they have told me, and I'm really a big fan of Kay Bowman in SQUIM. She has a book called Move Your DNA, all about, you know, some natural motions that are really missing from our modern repertoire of movement. And one of them is allowing our feet to strengthen themselves in a way that would prevent foot injuries by going barefoot and allowing the tendons, the fullness of their movement, and the muscles to build their strength. And the other thing that I really find in my time walking in the woods is this wealth of ecological knowledge. So I'll be walking along and the temperature is sort of steady, and all of a sudden the bottoms of my feet will feel very cold. And I'll look around and think, oh my gosh, here I am. I've been in this kind of mixed canopy, and now I'm in this solid canopy where the sun literally never shines on this earth, so it never warms. And I look around this just little micro niche of a place and see the difference in the understory in a place where the sun never shines. So if we gather information through the nerve endings of our feet, which are far more numerous and even more sensitive than those in our hands. So I'm talking too much about every little thing, but I do want to say, I did a retreat about this subject before I'd written this book at a monastery, a women's monastery in Oregon. And most of the women there were elders. And I invited them, we were indoors, even though it was sunny, because not everyone was able to move in and out comfortably. But I invited everyone to put their feet on the ground or walk their own grassy labyrinth, which many of them never even walked. And they all said, oh, but my feet are ugly. And everyone said that. I said, okay, so all of our feet are ugly. So let's just enjoy. If you want, it was just an invitation. So I thought this is not going to happen. No one's taking their shoes. So we had a couple hours break. And when we came back together, I have never been so surprised. All of these women in their 80s came in holding their shoes and giggling. And I thought, putting our feet on the earth invites joy. It evokes these memories of a time where we didn't have this separation or self-consciousness. And the reason I put this up there is because in the Hebrew Testament, this word shed, I think, is very powerful. In the Hebrew Testament, in the story where Moses approaches the burning bush and speaks with the divine, the voice of the divine in the bush says, Moses, and we see the translation, take off your shoes. And I learned that the verb in the original Hebrew is actually much stronger. The word is shed your shoes. And this is a word that is that great transformation of animals. Deer actually leaving behind an organ of their body no longer necessary, right? Snakes sloughing their skin to move into a newness of life. And so I think shed, what do we shed and cast off and leave behind? Pretense, separation, a kind of hubris, a kind of attention to material things and how we look and present. Simplicity, complexity, moving into simplicity. So I'm not talking about all this going out and running, barefoot in the world on concrete for an hour a day. But if we can place our feet on the earth and feel that connection from the ground to the tops of our crown, I think that something is gained. I love Helen's coyote. Is that the cutest thing? This is from a chapter called Wander. It's dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. And I think just so often, when we step out the door to go for a walk, we know where we're going to go, right? We have it all mapped out. And there's this wonderful science that won the Nobel Prize in 2014. John O'Keefe and his colleagues discovered that there were, and I'm going to use that word discovered for this, that there are location grid neurons in the hippocampus of our brains. So in other words, we are wired to learn through knowing ourselves in space, knowing our way through space and creating our way. And those neurons in modern humans are really flabby and underutilized, right? Because I know I got to Francis's house today by saying, Siri, take me to Francis. And she did, although my Siri has the voice of an English man. I think it's just, I like to think I have a butler. Anyway, we are wired to know ourselves in space. And we know that since we're Audubon people, the hippocampus of certain birds that cache is very large compared to the rest of their brain. Their ratio, the hippocampus to the rest of the brain ratio and to the body size ratio is very big. Do any of you know which bird that we know of has the largest hippocampus ratio?
Chickadees.
Yes. Black-capped chickadees, right? Bigger than, when we think of other caching birds like, say, acorn woodpeckers, they don't really need to know where they're going because they know it's all in that one tree, right? And the corvids are good catchers, like the crows and the jays, but they actually don't depend that much on their caches. And they cache big things, and they can find other things, and they can intimidate other beings into giving them their stuff. So chickadees, being so small and really having that high metabolism, rely heavily on their caches. And so they have that developed hippocampus. And the invitation in this chapter is to let go of our preordained sense of where we think we're going, And there's new science that supports both when we are meditating rather than focusing on one thing. Like we're always taught to focus on your breath and let the, like, say the thing 3 times so it's out of your mind and your mind becomes more clear. There's science now that suggests that when we let our mind wander, that can lead us to clarity and calm as much as trying to still the thoughts. And the same thing is true when we walk into the world without a plan. And I do it all the time. I walk out and I just fall into my old path. But sometimes we can just let our own intuition guide us. I tell a story in the book about walking out in the morning. I saw there's this little female coyote that turns up at, the liminal hour of dawn into daylight. And I saw her one morning and I thought, we're not supposed to follow the coyotes, right? And I wasn't going to let her know I was there, but I thought, she always just disappears around that corner. What happens next? And so I scampered out in my pajamas and my slippers and started. I ended up way far away from my house in my pajamas, which was, the slippers were my daughter's Uggs. So I wear them because of all this is a little aside. So my daughter's 23 now. And even though she is very, very much an animal activist, her desire to be in the tribe of teenager overrode her worry about the lambs for the Uggs for a brief time when she was 14. And it was so brief, because then she started worrying more about the lambs than wanting to fit in. And so these Uggs were sitting there and we all thought, well, the lambs are gone, so someone should wear the Uggs. So I do. So I put them on. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. That's not part of the show. Just try to get from the record. So I was following the coyote and I just saw her go up, down one block and up the next. And I really, how they just disappear? Even when they're just walking into the woods and you think, you know where they are and they are gone. It's really magical. But I followed her and I stopped. She disappeared very soon. So I started asking myself at every turn, where would she go? Where would she go? And I don't know the answer, but I just thought I'll just listen to my intuition. And I ended up somewhere that I had never been, even though I lived in this neighborhood in my pajamas. Even though I lived there for 16 years, I ended up at this beautiful community garden on the top of the hill. And in the middle of it, there's a spiral stone labyrinth. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's this message? Here I'm caught and tricked in my own preaching, learned my own lesson. So I would like to invite us all to just sort of step into the world without a plan, without a commodified number of footsteps that we need to gather, and see where we land. What time is it? I'll do a couple more. I know. So there's a chapter called Relate. So all of the chapters have a title that's an invitation of some kind. And this chapter is, can everyone hear me in the back? Am I speaking? Okay. This is a good room for sound. This chapter called Relate is an invitation to expand our sense of relationship to animal intelligences and animal consciousness. And Carmen really did that for me in a huge way. And the main way, if you heard my talk about Carmen, you heard my video clips of her speaking or her vocalizing. So, starlings are wonderful mimics, right? And she did mimic our, the sounds of our household, the sounds of our cat, our voice, some music, the Buicks ran outside of her window. But it took me a while, really months of living with her mimicking to understand the most important thing about it. And it was something that's not in the scientific literature. So it all dawned on me one morning when I came down the stairs in those same pajamas, they're pink with sock monkeys on them. And Carmen, as she always does, before I say anything to her, she says, "Hi, Carmen." I say says, I still think of her as being here. She says, "Hi, Carmen," which is the thing. The rest of my household is asleep, right? So I would normally whisper to her when I came downstairs. And then our big tuxedo cat, Delilah, comes down the stairs. And before Delilah begs for her food. Carmen looks at Delilah and says, "Meow." And when I'm pouring the coffee beans into the grinder, but before I turn the grinder on, Carmen says, "Roar." It was her least beautiful vocalization. And her kind of opus was when I would open and close the door of the microwave, and before I pressed the buttons, she'd say beep. Just pitch perfect in that kind of rhythm that you. It's like if I was in the next room, I'd think someone was making me microwave popcorn. I really thought it was the microwave more than I thought it was Carmen. So what this shows us is that she is not merely mimicking, she is anticipating what is coming next in the household. She knows what's going to come next from her life of listening, and that is her way of participating. This great oral connection is her way of participating in life. And I thought for a moment, my starling is so smart. Or not my smart starling, but this starling. And of course, I thought, being the slowest animal in the room, obviously, I thought, no, it's not just the starling, it is all the starlings. And that does not mean it is all the birds or all the animals. It's starling's unique way of being. And when we limit our sense of, I'm just all for doing away with the word anthropomorphism altogether, because it makes us really self-conscious. It keeps us from recognizing intelligence and emotions in animals and naming them because we're afraid of being called, unscientific. But the other thing it does is when we focus on human forms of intelligence, when we recognize intelligence insofar as it approximates our way of being in the world, we limit what we are able to imagine or honor in other beings. So we don't sit there waiting for the patterns of what's going to happen in the world orally, most of us, but starlings do. And now I walk into the world, and when I see all these other beings, first starting with the starlings, I thought they're sitting in this world where they know all the sounds about to happen. What must it be like to live that way? What must it be like to be a turkey vulture driven by our olfactory sense and flight? Or a worm finding its way by skin, or a rat knowing her way through the nocturnal night with whiskers. We think that rats skirt the edges of the room because they're furtive, but they do it because that's how they see. That's their one way of feeling safe and connected, finding your way. Not just rats. I know rats are controversial. Other rodents that we really love do that too. We walk always with an infinity of animal intelligences, some known, some never suspected, some unimaginable within our limited human comprehension. Invitation to read. And let's see, how are we doing on time? It's like 8:10. Should I talk a little more and take nice? Yeah, I'll talk a little more, but friends, okay, we're fine. Okay, I want to say there's going to come a time, and friends watching as well, when I'm going to say, are there any questions? And I want to let you know that it's very awkward for speakers to say that and not have there be any questions. So be ready to help me not feel awkward. I'm skipping to the last chapter, and then we're going to back up. But the last chapter in the book is called Spiral. And here we are in this really hard moment on Earth, and I don't want to pretend that hope or joy or love for this moment has to do with a Pollyanna-ish sort of way of being. It does not have to do with our sense that hope involves a particular outcome. Okay? This is a grown-up hope where we dwell in the circle of life, as we all do, no matter what is happening in the world. But where we recognize that hope is acting with love in response to the moment, no matter what is going to happen. It doesn't require us to be attached to a certain outcome. but to do what we know is right and what calls us in a moment, right? So this chapter explores the spiral. It's called Spiral. I was walking with my friend Kate McCurdy at Cedric Reserve, which is in Central California, beautiful oak savanna, lots of rattlesnakes. And she said, she's kind of a slow moving human and very, very thoughtful. And she said, they say it takes 100 years for an oak to grow and 100 years for an oak to die. And I love that. So the landscape there is very different. You know, here we really see decomposition in process, right? We're standing on the soil that's being created by the beautiful mother Western red cedar who's now lying on her side, right? With the ferns and little hemlocks growing from the moss that's breaking down her soft skin. In California, in this drier area, it doesn't look like that. You know, so I think that we have really an edge here, a beautiful edge, in being able to sort of sense that participation in that process. I talked to my husband. We were talking about our end of life plans a few years ago, and I said, well, here's what I want. I want to not be embalmed, and I would like to be buried at Ferndale or another natural burial cemetery in the state. Do you all know about natural burial? So of course, I called Ferndale and they said, yeah, you can be buried in a linen shroud or dress or a wicker basket, but even the thread has to be completely natural, everything biodegradable. And so I told my husband I also wanted, I gave him the number of a death midwife. I said, if you need help, call. Does anyone know Nora, or did know Nora Cedarwood Young? Yeah, so Nora was alive. That's whose number I gave him. A beautiful death midwife who lived in Kingston, and she was part of the just natural death movement, and she has since passed. So I also told Tom what I said: don't unplug me if I'm brain dead right away. Said, watch all 7 seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, go to Paris, you know, read what, Dostoevsky or something. And then, you know, after all that, then make a decision. Just let my body sort of get used to things for a while. And then I said, also, I would like to be buried in an organic handmade linen dress. And he said, he was fine. He was a little bit, you know, it was an anxious conversation a little bit, but when I got to there, his eyes just opened really big. I thought, what? And I thought, oh, poor Tom. He's going to be dealing with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all of these other things. And where is he going to come up with a handmade organic linen dress? So I said, oh, I'm sorry. Strike that one. I will make it myself. And so I did. And I'm still stitching on it. And stitching is very calming to me. Hand sewing is very calming. But what this is doing for me is that wonderful practice that we find in many, many cultures and meditations and forms of spiritual practice, is the idea of keeping the remembrance that our time here is limited in our mind, cultivates not empathy, compassion, gratitude, and a sense of belonging, right? I love this fox and connecting the under earth with the above earth. And so we are all in that life, death, life cycle, no matter where we are in our life. And I've been adding embroidered quotes to the dress as I go in 100% cotton green. And a couple, I just want to make sure I get them right. Walt Whitman, I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. And Joy Harjo, remember the earth whose skin you are. And this is the last one I'm going to show you today. It's from a chapter called Create. And one of the reasons that I'm only sharing this many is, as you can see, for one thing, I love this conversation. So I can't add any more without it being too long. But the other thing is I really wanted to share some of Helen's beautiful art with you, but not all of it. Because there's more in the book, and the slides really don't do justice to the way that the art looks on the page. And this is one of my favorites. So the hand is in the middle, not to show that humans are at the center, but to show that with our single lives, the acts that we take radiate out into the world in ways that we can't really know or imagine, like a starling murmuration. I love etymology as a writer. So I always, when I'm interested in a word, I look it up in an etymological dictionary, which is so interesting because it's not like a normal dictionary where you look up a word and it gives you a definition. It says, go to this other word, paragraph 12 so create is one of those words. It is the same root as the word creature, creature and creation. So as humans, we are creatures creating within the creation of the wild natural world. I love that, to create. Creare means to bring forth from the earth. Bring forth from the earth. And so that is the invitation here. The question, what is it that we will bring forth to this moment with our own lives? And I'm just going to read one little piece and open it up to questions. I know one thing. I'm going to cycle back. I promised that I was going to cycle back to forest bathing. Right? So one of the things that I want us to think about with that beautiful science that affirms our connection, multidimensional connection to the natural world. An issue, a danger with that is that science is in danger of reducing the natural world to another commodity. So one of the things that you read is that there's a certain amount of time that we can spend in nature every day to get all the benefits of forest bathing. Guess how much time that is? 20 minutes. 20 minutes is the dose of nature. So can't you see us like setting our Fitbits, our Apple Watches, and got that in? So nature is, and we see, you know, forest therapy is happening. And I know people that are working as forest guides and forest therapists, and the intention is very beautiful and pure. But sometimes on the websites, they'll say something like, the forest is the therapist, you are the guide. And I think the forest is therapeutic. The forest is not a therapist. It's not something we take from for our own health. We live in this great reciprocity, and that's what that spiral message was as well, that we breathe in, we breathe out. We draw this beautiful health and imagination and intelligence from relating deeply to the natural world. And in return, we offer, doesn't have to be a megaphone, right? It can be our witness, it can be our silence, our gratitude, our walking with quiet footsteps. Y'all are lucky I forgot to read the part about Little Red Riding Hood. I was going to read it at the beginning, so I'm just going to read this little snippet. The book starts with frogs and goes to Little Red Riding Hood. Because I love that invitation from the wolf. In Jungian psychology, the wolf is seen as a predator that is luring us away from the path that we're meant to walk. But I think a more beautiful reading is that the path is luring Little Red off the trail. And instead of now going to her grandmother's house with just these dumb muffins, she's going to have the wildflowers that the wolf instructed her to pick, while he can go and eat the grandmother up, which he does. And he'll eat Little Red Riding Hood up too, but they're all fine, right? They emerge with this exquisite new hunger, and the wolf's going to be okay, unlike our wolves. But anyway, that story's in the book. I love Little Red Riding Hood story. So, from the chapter Create, nothing has prepared us for this planetary moment. There is no pre-walked path to offer direction. Our individual charism cannot be prescribed, proscribed, or even thought up in our head. It can, however, be listened for. A rooted, ongoing, reciprocal conversation with the wild earth, a spiral of inward, receptive stillness and outward, creative action. It may be painting, singing, writing. It may be tree sitting, anti-fracking demonstrations, fundraising. It may be tending the garden, the farm, the wisdom of the elders, the faith of the young. It may be prayer for a threatened grassland, knowing the ways of birds, beholding a coyote's gaze, sacred silence at the base of an ancient tree. It may be weeping for the loss of a forest, tithing a portion of our life energy in the form of money for orca protection. It is most likely a combination of such things. It is certain to be countercultural and counterproductive according to all the usual measures. Those we have been taught, those that can be labeled with a sum or a number. Walt Whitman asked that which we all primally ask, the question, oh me, so sad, reoccurring, what good amid these, oh me, oh life? We hold the 10,000 things of the troubled earth in mind, that's from the chapter, and in mind and in spirit, while offering the few beautiful things that we and we alone are able to offer with our 10 little fingers. Whitman answered his own question, that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. This is all we have, our life and what we give. In our ragged wandering with padded feet and pricked ears and rewilded minds, we find gifts from the wild earth, and we come to share our own gifts in return. Thank you so much. Okay, so don't disappoint me. Does anyone have any questions?
There was an interesting comment from Annie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Annie mentions that in the journals of Lewis and Clark, they learned that the native tribes always took off their moccasins before sharing a pipe as an important humbling action to connect with the earth and each other. And Lewis and Clark also followed that when they were with them.
That's beautiful. I did not know that. That's lovely. And we know that humility, human, both those words are related to the word humus, the word earth, right? Yeah. So humility sometimes we think of as, oh, I'm not worthy, but really it's a sense of simplicity and relationship and a way of reducing our sense of pretense, and that's beautiful. I'm so glad to hear that. Anne, did you have a question?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is a beautiful presentation about a beautiful book. And my question to you is, do you think you could have written this book 10 years ago? And if not, why not?
Thank you. I'm going to say probably not.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is it's not necessarily the world situation now, although I think climate crisis definitely increased my sense of purpose. But part of it is living longer. I mean, for me, in a sense, this book was a kind of, it's a very personal book. It's quirky, but it's what I finally felt brave enough to say. And there are things that I've sort of hinted around at in other books, but didn't want to alarm people. And I thought at this point in my life, and I'll say my career, if I can't say what I really mean and want to say, then what is it all for? And so I think it's partly just that I'll say courage that comes from gathering years and recognizing the strength of our voice and not caring that much if what the reception is.
Yeah.
Although I've been very gratified by that. So yeah, that's what I would say. I don't think I was ready to write this book 10 years ago. Other questions?
Are you taking questions from the peanut gallery?
Of course, yes.
Hi, Lyanda, it's Annie. It's been a long time. I just
Oh
love
gosh,
to see you.
see you.
I'm also interested, like, I can see a change in science and the kinds of questions that scientists are asking now that are more daring as far as the sentience of animals and birds and worms and, all of life. And I'm encouraged by that after talking to neuroscientists about 10 years ago at a conference, and they were kind of saying, that nature doesn't have the same kind of intelligence that humans have, and they had this huge argument for it. And I'm just curious about your perspective, kind of voicing the intelligence of nature in this way that you're doing, how you see a change in science portraying nature. And my background's in philosophy, and it used to be man against nature. All the philosophers were man against nature back in the 1800s and even 1900s. It was very dominating nature with our intelligence as humans. So I'm just curious about how you see science changing.
Right. Thank you, Annie. So great to see you. Annie and I go way, way back to Seattle Times, and both background in body work and philosophy. Yeah, that's a great question. So there are changes, and there's more change to happen that needs to happen, I think. So one big change is the willingness of scientists to discuss animal consciousness, to even allow that into the conversation. But so in 2012, there was a consortium of scientists, and both there were medical doctors, research scientists, and psychiatrists who came together, and like neurophysicians and neuropsychologists who all came together in this consortium. I think it was called the Cambridge Consortium on Animal Consciousness. And they wrote this big paper, and they all signed it, saying that they were officially, scientifically recognizing that animals have consciousness. It's worthy of the conversation. We can talk about it. And this is 2012. And I thought, wow, okay, first it was heralded as this big step forward. And I thought that, which was great. I mean, because really, if you're a scientist, if you read scientific papers, that is not something that it's too murky, right? It's not, we can't quantify consciousness. And science, in order to have a place in the peer-reviewed system, has to be quantifiable and replicable. And something as murky, even as human consciousness, I mean, that's why we got behaviorism in psychology, right? To be able to measure things so that science, psychology could get grants and be seen as a hard science. And so it was sort of a fashion. But 150 years ago, Darwin said exactly what this consortium said, is that there's a continuity of consciousness. Darwin, so-called father of modern science, never sought to separate consciousness from morphology. He didn't say we're continuous in morphology, but not in mind and consciousness. And he thought that emotions in animals, he just took it as a given. He talked about animals as being happy or peaceful or angry, and never, like, even nature writers now still put it in quotes for fear of being labeled and belittled as anthropomorphizing. And that's why, like I said, I want to get rid of that word altogether to measure, as a measure of our discussion. I think it messes us up in both ways. But one thing that that I'm hoping will be a next step is that in science now, we still see this objectification of other human animals. So if you read a study of any animal that they know the sex of the animal, they'll refer to, let's say a chimpanzee even. They'll call the chimpanzee a she at first, but then afterwards we'll refer to the animal as it. So they let us know whether it's male, whether the animal is male or female, and then objectify the animal as it. And so that's something that keeps us, and language is very important. There's a chapter on the way we use words in this book called Speak. And I think that, and it addresses this idea of itting things as, treating things as objects, treating other animals as objects. So I think that's a starting point, is to sort of let scientists know that we are ready to respect the intelligence and the significance of science without this demeaning objectivity. So I think we're moving, and there's more room. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that was really good about the he, she. That's a really interesting point.
Well, I wrote about crows and starlings are a little bit easier to tell apart, male and female, than starlings are easier than crows. But whenever I'm out, and maybe this happens to y'all when you're out observing birds and you refer to a bird as a he, no one says anything. But sometimes you're just making a guess. I'll do this. Half the time I'll say he or she, I'll make a guess. And if I say he, no one says anything. But if I say she, people say, how do you know it's a female? And I'm hoping that the discussion now of the gender non-binary will offer us language to speak about animals with a language maybe that's gender neutral, but still subjective. So that could be a great thing that we're moving toward, that this cultural movement will influence the way that we think about other than humans too, or speak about other than humans. Anything more? Back.
The word hospice keeps coming to me. I think based on partly on this conversation with Annie, and the imagery that's flashing in my mind is like some of the poignant photos I've seen in National Geographic or elsewhere, where like the handler of the last white rhino with this huge, massive head in his lap and weeping, And I think about what's rising up in me kind of right now as the idea of the reciprocity of hospice with us and nature at this time. What you lived through with Carmen. But, even when a bird hits the window, the kind of time we take to wake up to the reciprocity of death, to what we are probably not going to be able to stop in the way of some of these huge climatic shifts. And we objectify it when we say something like the sixth great extinction, like, oh yeah, let's go to the South Pole, but instead to keep our hearts open to the minute need to hospice nature and to be hospiced by nature in return, which is why you're stitching your linen dress.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I don't have anything to add.
Because of the way you love words, I'm just waiting for you to run home to your other dictionary and find out a whole lot of things about that word.
I am. In fact, that's what I was thinking. I don't. What a beautiful word, and I hadn't really thought about it in relationship, beyond the way that we
as a bird,
one another. Yeah, very beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree with you that the way we label things can sometimes be a way of just shrugging things off.
Yeah.
Oh, we're in a great. It's too late. We're in a great extinction event. Oh, of course that's happening.
Yeah.
And that may be so, but I love what you're saying about that doesn't mean that we're not fully present and open and
well, and there's a lot of talk right now about how do we grieve for this moment in the planet and kind of eco grief and all of this kind of global grief, just hold one dead mouse. You know, just lay yourself down in the compost and, you know, it's like Mary Oliver's poem that begins, I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly. You know, too. But for me, it's how I can discharge this amount of grief I'm carrying into the intimate. Because otherwise it just drives me over some edge.
I'm sure you know Joanna Macy's work, the work that reconnects. So that's, and she has a lot of practices in that work that she open sources. So we can share those with one another. We just look at her website for lots of practices for engaging in that kind of eco grief in ways that honor it rather than pushing it away. Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Oh, yeah, Casca. Her name's Joanna Macy. Buddhist teacher, elder. Well, friends, I want to thank you so much. I'm not in a rush. I will be happy to chat with you. I brought my favorite pen, so I'm happy to sign your books. And if you don't have a book, your beautiful independent bookshop Kingfisher can order it or has a couple copies of Read It on hand. So I just want to thank you so much for your attention and for working with us tonight. It works really well, I think. Yay. Everybody on Zoom.
Thank you. Well, you don't have to sit there. Gallery. Yeah, okay.
Patty, we do have a few suggestions for next time, but I'll just email those to you.
If you're talking about suggestions for the speaking and stuff like that.
Yes.
I know, we need to get a mic for the speaker. We know.
Well, there's some other things too, but we'll talk later.
Yeah, I've had a lot of things that were coming to me on the telephone, and that's the reason why I was looking at it. I was like, please don't interrupt me from Lyanda.
I think for the first time, this was really good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I'm trying to get everybody up here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm trying to get everybody, hang on a second, come on. Moderate. Yeah. Trying to get everybody on.
No, can I say one more thing, honey?
The thing, the white thing covered where she was
That's
trying
the
to.
blue one.
Yeah, it's a little blue.
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, the blue's on.
The blue square.
Oh, the blue's on.
You can do it.
Well, I keep,
I know.
That didn't work.
No,
it's not working.
that's not working.
I don't know why it's not working.
Yeah, and then that thing at the top hid beneath the white line.
Which one? Which thing?
The view thing. Yeah, you almost got it, the pointer up to the top right where it said view, and then that white line covered it up.
Yeah, I know, and I can't get rid of the white.
Exactly. It's very frustrating on the screen somewhere.
I'm sorry. Everybody on Zoom.
It's you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks for putting up with this.
Sometimes you have to take it out of full screen to get. I know recording would be amazing.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't hear you.
Stop recording.
I look around, everybody's,
That's what.
Free discount on the hardcover right now. Yeah, so.
When they go to their first